may be seated. Happy Easter to you, my friends.
Happy Easter.
It is still Easter. Easter's not over. Actually, Easter lasts for 50 days. We have 50 days of Easter, which I love because it's 10 days longer than Lent. And Easter is a time to rejoice. Particularly this Sunday has traditionally been known as Holy Humor Sunday or Laughter Sunday or God's Joke Sunday. It was started in the 15th century to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, where people would come together and celebrate with joy and laughter and humor. And oftentimes they would tell jokes or stories that would be so funny that people would just leave the church laughing with a lot of joy. In the 17th century, though, it got banned by the Pope because maybe it got out of hand. Like people were laughing and joking too much. But in recent years, it's made a bit of a resurgence. Around the 80s or so, it started coming back. People started doing this Holy Humor Sunday. I think it was to get people to come back after Easter, you know. Come back, we'll tell jokes next week. And we'll laugh and we'll have a great time. But it has made a resurgence. And I really thought about this sermon and this celebration and this Sunday. I really was like, we should just tell a lot of jokes. We should just have a great, joyful celebration. We should have a wonderful time. I even talked to Phil about how we could incorporate, but I didn't want to make it cheesy or silly, right? But I wanted to make it joyful and full of laughter. And then when I thought about it, you know, I love jokes. I love them so much, but I don't often make people laugh with them. As my students will tell you, they usually groan at my jokes. Yeah, you don't have to agree. You know, because like, right? You don't want to tell jokes around the Easter eggs, right? Because it'll crack them up. Oh, see, that's good. Actually, it's terrible, right? Most people groan at my terrible jokes, and so I do love them, though. But so maybe we shouldn't say them today. But we do need a lot more joy and laughter, I think, right? Whew. We need a lot more joy and laughter in the world, because the world's a mess. If you haven't noticed, there's war and violence and hatefulness and confusion and uncertainty and pain and sorrow, and that's just on the national stage. And I know people dealing with grief and depression and worry and sadness and sickness. And it's too much sometimes, right? The world is too much, and there's a lot going on. We need a lot more joy and a little bit more laughter. Not necessarily like to make all that go away, right? Maybe to help us get through it. When I was a kid, my great-uncle died. I was really young, and we were gathered together in my great-uncle's house, my great-aunt's house, which is right beside my grandma's house. We were all gathered together with his family and my family, and we were eating and sharing a meal together, and my family was telling stories, and they were all laughing around the room, and I was so confused. I went to my mom, was like, why are they laughing? Shouldn't we be sad? Why are they laughing? And my mom said, they're laughing because we're sharing stories of your great uncle and the funny things that he did, and we're sharing stories to remember him. I said, yeah, but we're sad. She said, yeah, but the laughter helps us get through the sadness. It's the laughter that helps us get through the sadness. I don't know what the disciples were doing the first night of the resurrection, but when they gathered in that room, I imagine they did the same thing that I did at my uncle's house. I can imagine they gathered together to share stories, to have food, to comfort each other. Mary Magdalene had already told them that she had seen the Lord, but they hadn't seen him. And so they gathered together, they locked the door because they were afraid. And I imagine that in that locked room, they began to share stories. They began to tell stories about Jesus and his life and how he would stand up against those religious leaders that they did not like, about how he welcomed in the outcasts, or about that time he called Peter Satan. Wasn't that pretty funny? That's pretty good. I can imagine they're telling these stories together in that upper room, in that room together and breaking bread. And as they do, Jesus shows up. Jesus shows up right in the room. The door is shut and locked, but Jesus shows up in the midst of their storytelling and their food. And he holds out his hands and his side and he says, "Look, it's really me. See my scars?" And the disciples are overwhelmed with joy. Overwhelmed with joy. Jesus shows them and assures them that he has overcome sin and death in this world, and that the evil forces around them do not have the final say. That he's overcome. That God's love wins. They were all just overjoyed, and I can imagine continue to share stories with Jesus and break bread together that evening. All of them were so amazed, except for one. Thomas, he wasn't there. Thomas gets a bad rap oftentimes. We know him from this story, but Thomas is probably one of the most committed and faithful disciples of all of them. He's probably the one who told Jesus, "I'll go with you wherever you go, even to death. I'll go with you." Thomas is probably the most committed, and maybe that's why he wasn't there, because it was too much for him. His death, Jesus' death, was too much. So the other disciples come up to Thomas and they see him and they're like, "Hey, Thomas, we've seen the Lord." And he said, "Oh yeah, okay, right. Yeah, you're not going to get me with this one." They say, "No, we've seen the Lord." It was 7 days, a whole week, where Thomas was just hearing these stories and not certain about them, where he was left out of this amazing experience that the other disciples had. 7 days, a week goes by, and they're gathered together again in the room once again. And I can imagine they're once again eating together, breaking bread together, telling stories about Jesus, about his resurrection, about overcoming sin and death, but also maybe about the stories that he was telling them before, but this time in a new light because they know the whole story now. I can imagine they're sharing stories about how he said this would happen. I can imagine them sharing stories about his sermons and how they thought they understood him, but they had no idea what he was talking about. I can imagine them laughing together. I can imagine Thomas sitting there hearing it all, uncertain, not sure what to believe. And as they eat together, as they break bread together, Jesus shows up once again. But this time he goes directly to Thomas. And he holds out his hands. He says, "Thomas, look at my scars. Thomas, look at my side. It's me." Thomas had said he wants to put his hands in the scars. He says, "I'm not going to believe unless I have absolute proof. I'm not going to believe." And Jesus is here holding it out for him. We don't know if Thomas put his hands there. I don't think he had to. Because what he says next is just, "My Lord, my God, it's you. It's true. The evil, the pain, the sorrow, they have no hold. They do not win. It's true." And then Jesus says something profound to Thomas. "Oh, Thomas," he says, "you believe because you've seen me. But blessed are those who have not seen me and yet still believe." You believe because you've seen me. But blessed are those who have not seen but still believe. I can imagine Jesus saying that to Thomas. But I can also imagine Jesus saying that to us. Blessed are you who have not seen, yet still believe. Blessed are you who have not seen yet still believe. I think it's a reminder that faith is really less about proof and more about hope. I know in our scientific age and our scientific reasoning in our mind, we want to have proof. We want to have solid evidence that this happened, that this took place. We want to have solid proof. We want to touch the scars. We want to hold on to historical accuracy. We want to know everything that was true. It has to be true. We want to know that. But I don't think that's what Jesus is getting at. I don't think Jesus is trying to make some historical proof. I think what Jesus is saying is, blessed are those who still believe that love wins in this world when it doesn't seem like it. Blessed are those who still believe that life rules this world even when death is all around us. Blessed are those who still believe in love even when hate is all consuming. Blessed are those who still believe that goodness and kindness and forgiveness and compassion and all the things Jesus stood for are so evident in this world, even though it seems contrary to our eyes. Blessed are you who believe that God's love and life and justice reigns even when it seems and feels like love is winning in this world, when evil is winning in this world. Blessed are you who believe even though you've not seen. I think faith is more about hope than anything else. It's holding on to the truth of the resurrection, that death, that violence, that suffering will not win. Will not win. Even though it seems like they are right now. I think faith is about that hope. Right after Thomas moves from this doubt to belief, the scripture says that there are a lot more stories that take place that are not written down in this book. I kind of like that, right? There's stories that aren't even in this book of Jesus showing up, of love winning, of life ruling, of kindness, compassion, forgiveness, having the day. There's stories still written down that aren't in this book. But these are written down so that you can believe in that truth. These are written down so you can believe in that gospel. I think that maybe that's why we come to church. So that we can hear those stories over and over again. We come to church not just on Easter, not just on high holy days, but Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. We come to hear the scriptures read so that it can give us hope, so that it can renew our faith, so that it will help us believe that this is true. That goodness is stronger than evil, that love is stronger than hate, that life is stronger than death, because we know and believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that hate and violence and oppression do not have any power. Sin and evil and death do not have any victory or sting. I think we need to hear it over and over and over again. Because if you listen to the stories in social media or the news, it would seem hopeless and helpless. Like, it would seem like the world is full of despair, and so is our entire lives. It might feel like the bullies and the warmongers are winning. It might feel like violence and hate is winning. It might feel like evil is victorious. It might feel like that. But the joke's on them. Because love wins. Love always wins.